Open your mind to the way, the conscious way, the way of conscious mindfulness. With me, Tifu Boggy. Tifu means guide, muse, something who points you along your way, who guides you on your path. Boggy means the balancer between the chaos and the calmness. And he's my healing, my martial, and my spiritual name. And for the last 39 years, I have been studying the Taoist art. The Tao means the way, the path, the balance. And I've been studying techniques and skills like Qigong, Tai Chi, Ba Kwa Chang, Tic Ta, Tui Na, Chinese massage, reflexology, five-element cooking, I Ching, and many, many other different philosophies and techniques. And these I use to help people find their own personal way, path, or balance, or their own Tao. I've also helped many people with migraines, with fibromyalgia, with ME, with MS, and I've also helped even coaches, healers, light workers supercharge themselves and ensure they never burn out. And that's what I do and what I'm all about. What's this show all about? Well, this show is the way of conscious mindfulness. It is a regular podcast show discussing spirituality and science, blending and balancing it with health and well-being and mind, body and spirit with a Taoist twist. What does that word mean again? It means the way, the path, the balance. Now, this isn't a normal talk show. Anything with me in it definitely isn't normal. Each week we either have a subject or a guest. Today we have a very lovely guest, and our aim, our goal, is to have an open discussion to help us find new techniques, new ways, new skills to balance our very own personal way, path, or Tao. So that's my blurb out of the way. So welcome the wonderful, the awesome, the absolutely amazing. Yes, I'm talking about you, Emily. Good morning, good afternoon for me, good evening somewhere, good night somewhere else to you, Emily. How are you doing, firstly?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate the warm welcome.
Thank you for joining. You've got some very interesting things going on, which I'm very much interested in learning about. But first, I will ask that question. That question I have asked your 285. So the 285 times I've asked this question, and I have had one or two guests run away. Not to scare you, but it is true. And the question is, the question is this. So, Emily, this is your show. This is the way of Emily Dexter. I got that right, didn't I? So this is your show. This is your way. So, what is your own personal way, path, or Tao?
Well, I'm not going to run away, so just going to preface that to start off with. But
That's good. I already had two. I don't need a third.
Yeah, I think we'll keep you at two at least for today. But my personal Tao is absolutely, I guess, the way of storytelling at the core of it. I believe in stories being the most human aspect of us in so many ways, and pretty much everything I do revolves around stories in some capacity. Whether that is, I'm a author myself, so whether it's me writing my own stories, or if I'm doing psychic reading, channeling, healing work, it's just helping someone figure out the depth of their own story. Or if I'm helping other people to create their stories, it's all focused on that storytelling element. And I believe that's the most healing, activating thing we can do for another person, is help them with their story.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in Taoism, especially or in the East, the Taoist philosophy, especially, and Buddhism, they love stories. They love playing things and making things very flowery. And even when they talk about energy or the body, they will make a story out of it and do it in a very metaphorical way as well. So stories are a very powerful thing. And I know my girlfriend, the wonderful Alice Well, she did story writing with you just recently,
Yes.
and that's really cool. And so, I mean, stories are very magical, very powerful. I mean, what got you into it? What started you off? Where's the beginning?
So reading has been my favorite thing to do for as long as I can remember, outside of like swimming. That's the only other thing that I could think of that would probably be my favorite. My mom actually, when I was basically from the time I was born till the time I was, I think 6 or 7, she worked for an author. So Leo Buscaglia was his name. Before he passed. And so he was a very, what I call now a high vibration author. He wrote a lot about the concepts of love and how to bring love into your life and all this really powerful stuff. So that was fun because I immediately grew up like with that being a career option presented to me. And then after that, she became a librarian. So I spent tons of time in the library. And so that was something that I've always wanted to do, was to be a storyteller in some way. And as far as connecting that to the innate power and energy that comes with stories and the activation magic that I believe all stories have, that is kind of an expanse on my own spiritual awakening or spiritual reawakening that happened in my early 20s after I left a whole abusive relationship. It was a whole thing. But I mean, it's a very simple concept when you think of it, because we use fables and those sort of things to teach children. Mythology is just stories in a lot of ways that were designed to teach people back in time and even now, even though I think that metaphysically there's some other components that go on in with mythology. But the concept of stories being a teaching device is not new. But the concept that if you read a story that is intentionally been, endowed with activated energy and healing energy, and that you allow that to change your reality, because every story changes your reality. Once it's heard, once it's read, your reality is changed in some way. Even if it's the worst story you've ever heard, it's still going to change your reality. So so it's endowed. If we endow those stories with really high vibration energy and really powerful energy, then it can actually activate and wake up people and benefit the vibration of the planet and everyone around us. So that's kind of where I have taken stories from, that like really high vibration place that I started in to now.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, and there is that interesting thing, both stories and music are teachers of my teachers always said everything and everyone is a teacher, and that goes into like one of the styles of the different styles of Taoism. One of the styles is called the Cloud Whisperer, and one of the Cloud Whisperers believes that everything is in Taoism in general, but especially Cloud Whisperers. Everything talks to you, and everything, everything is a speaker in a way, giving you a message. And it's funny how stories, like you said, and that's the bit for me. It's like even the bad ones, even the bad stories, something sticks in your head, or there's always some cliche, and in actual fact, there's a lot of there's a lot of like the B movies that were actually like famous, and there's certain books, the old like Mills and Boon books, the the old love stories. I was once called, one of my exes called me, I was the Mills and Boons man, because she thinks I was very much like the knight in the shining armor. That was my sort of, and it's like, to me that's very corny, but it's funny, like those sort of things that sort of stick in people's memories. And stories have a very powerful thing.
Well, that's also the importance of leveraging like high vibration entertainment at the core of it. If everything's going to stick in your head, or if some sort of the energy from whatever you're consuming, whether it's a story that's in a book or on television or on a podcast, or like who knows how you're consuming it, no matter how you are, if it's some part of it's going to stick in your head, you want to make really conscious choices about what you're consuming on purpose and how that can benefit your vibration. Does that mean like no horror movies? That's always what people say first, is like, oh, so I can't watch horror movies anymore. It's like, no, if that's going to benefit you and you really like that, and that makes you feel like something good, or like that, makes you laugh or whatever it does for you, that's amazing. But if it's something that's going to tear you down or make you feel incredibly depressed for days, and maybe doesn't align with your highest and good, maybe we don't consume that as openly or as often. Maybe we put more intention on how is this going to benefit my vibration, or what energy is coming off of this for me.
Oh, 100%, 100%. There's this interesting thing. I always go back to sort of Eastern philosophy because I've always loved that sort of stuff. But there's a whole thing within the Eastern philosophy, like people have heard of Reiki, or a lot of people have heard of like Reiki. But there's actually older versions. There's Reiki was actually only from the 1900s. Sensei Usui, only, or Usi, as some people call him, was only in the 1900s, but it goes far further back. And the reason I bring this up is that because there are certain books like the Tao Te Ching, which was sort of this Taoist book of wisdom. What a lot of people don't know is that it was said that they would chant or they would meditate on certain scrolls and certain books to purify them and give them power. So there was actually books that there's certain, but there's even in the midst, like in the East, they would say, that book has a lot of energy. They would say like there's certain books. Oh, that one actually, Lord of the Rings. There was my thesis would say somebody's chanted on that book, somebody has meditated on that book because there's a lot of energy in that book. And the story is so vivid that they would even say that's not a story that, well, they would say all stories are other dimensions, other realities that have come through. But they would also say about certain books that people have, if you can meditate on a book or chant on a book or Reiki the book, if you want to use that word, and that book, every book that was printed is connected to that book because everything's connected to everything else. So within the Eastern or the ancient knowledge, they believe that all words that are spoken are all interconnected. So if you meditate on a certain set of words, they have great power.
I love that. I absolutely love that and completely adore that. I agree with that on so many different levels. Definitely the whole, like, all stories come from a different dimension, or at least all characters come from a different dimension. Like the whole concept that we do in my business, The Forgotten Storytellers, with Crystalline, who's my business partner, is we talk a lot about, hey, let's channel in your characters because they're beings that exist. Like the world exists, the beings exist. Like let's actually tune into them and have like a conversation. Did they have the exact story? Maybe not, but you know that you're speaking to someone that's inspiring this character in some way. And then that can leverage your spiritual health. So you can learn to do that with your spirit guides, and you can leverage that to talk to ancestors or whatever you'd like to do. But it starts with a character that has already inspired you to create this powerful book that you're obviously meant to create because the idea is yours. It was given to you for a reason. It's not just, given to you to sit there. Most likely it's most likely given to you to actually do something with. So that's kind of the concept. So I love that is part of the Eastern teaching. I had no idea. And the meditating on the book. And I love that you use Lord of the Rings as an example, because if there were ever a book that was meditated over and blessed and all sorts of things, he probably did it in 16 different languages, 5 of which he invented himself. So like
that was the whole point. Like with him, I was so fascinated with him because he's actually, as you just pointed out, he's a linguist, and so he understands. But the whole thing, the thing with language that always fascinates me is Bruce Lee was one person to say this, is that learning a language is one thing, but when each word, like in English, every single word we speak, there is some meaning behind that word. There's some understanding. There's lots of energy behind that word. Certain phrases are British and not necessarily, but there's one phrase like, say, one for the road. When if you go for a drink or go to the pub in Britain, there's a saying that says, "Oh, have one for the road," the drink. Now that phrase came from, bit dark, but that phrase came from the days of when they hung people and on the road that they would go past the pub, and the landlady or landlord of the pub would give that person who's going to be hung, they would give them a drink, and they would say, "That's one for the road," and so there's an energy, there's a power behind those words. That and like like nursery rhymes, Ring a Ring of Roses, when you actually learn what they're really about, there's a whole lot of energy behind them. And so when you look at these certain stories, and especially the stories that become cult or end up, especially things at the end of like cosplay. There's so much, there's so much depth there, and people have taken those stories alive. Can you tell me that's not really out there somewhere? Because NASA knows there's 14 dimensions, and they admit there's at least 14 dimensions with life, and that's all they said. They've kept it at that. But what do they mean by that? But my Sifu's always said, when you imagine something, you're channeling.
Yes.
You're channeling from somewhere else, and that was a very strong belief that's been like ever since I was 12 years old. That's what was taught to me. So
because it's so accurate, and it breaks my heart how disconnected we are from our imagination, and how much, whenever I work with anyone, how much belief work we have to do around, no, your imagination is real. It is not fake. You are not just making this up. Like that level of belief work that so many people have to go through because they feel so disconnected from this imagination, because they've been told from the time they were itty bitty that it's just pretend, or you're faking it, or it's only in your imagination. And it's like, no, that's your channeling power. That's where all of the source of your magic comes from. So of course books are magical, things you paint are magical, all these things you're creating from that imaginative space is a channeled action that you're putting energy into. So the cool thing with that is anyone can leverage that further. Like if you're like, oh, I want to paint, if you're artistic and you're going to paint something, what kind of energy do you want to put into it? Simply just imagine that energy as you paint, and bam, there it is. You're actually into, channeling that energy into that piece. With writing, it's the same thing, and it's super powerful. And yeah, absolutely, especially books that are like well loved and well cosplayed and all these different things. Like not only are you tuning into and helping other people channel via their imagination because you've written something to activate their imaginative space, but they're now imagining it so much and channeling it in so much, they're creating something else out of it, which is just profound and super amazing. And one of the ways we can impact the most people by doing something that feels not necessarily so massive. It's not like speaking on a stage to 100,000 people. It's writing a book in your living room. And then all of a sudden you're changing people's lives.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And the one other thing I wanted like to sort of say on this, I got a lot, is the enthusiasm is that is that whatever, when we're children, we paint stuff or we do stuff, and to us it's awesome. To you might go, what is it again? But to them it's also, and it's their creativity and it's opening up. But when we then, as adults, we sort of, because we at some point somebody said, oh, you're not very good at that, or you're not this, and we get that distilled, and people think, oh, my story's never going to be good enough, or it's never going to be great enough. And I just the reason I wanted to point that up was some of the most powerful people in history, some of the most powerful stories in history, some of the most wonderful songs in history were inspired by or written from very obscure books, very books that hard were not not famous, not cosplayed, not and every book is important. Every book has power, and every book has meaning. And there are great libraries with all the these books, and it's just really, really interesting. I've always found, like, there are certain books that, or somebody says, oh, this line came from this book, and you look for that book and it's virtually, it's out of print, it hardly exists, it's really hard to find. And it's like, but that book inspired somebody, that book. And the whole point of, like, you could say something to somebody, and to you it's just a throwaway comment, but to them it could blow their mind. It could open up their world to a whole new reality. I've had that done to me, and I've done that to quite a few people. And that's why I really I'm great passion for people who write and who express themselves, and yeah, you should, it's definitely something you should let embrace. And I'm getting very excited, especially going on at 900 miles an hour. But it's something, because every word you say or anything you write, everything that exists is meant to exist. So if you write it, it's meant to exist, and if it exists, it will affect somebody out there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's true. There is so many things based off of, a book that maybe really inspired you, but no one knows of, or, that those things are just as powerful. And that's the other thing too. I've been a part of, like, I've written multiple books myself. I was a ghostwriter for a long time. So I wrote other people's books. And, you know, I've been parts of writing programs and dabbled in both fiction and nonfiction, all those different things. And there's so much philosophy out there around like, oh, you want to find, you know, your ideal readers, the people that want to, you know, are going to read your book, and that are meant to read your book. And the funny thing is that's one of those things where it's like, that's not actually something that you really need to think about, because again, if it's supposed to exist, it's meant to exist. And you truly just need to show up for it. And then it's going to, you're going to find the path to get it to the people who need it, because it's supposed to reach those people. Even if it is, you know, a small obscure thing, it'll reach the people that need it when they need it. And that was meant to reach. And that's kind of another like side part of it too, is how much power is in that, of just kind of being able to like leverage that trust in the universe and leverage that trust in reality and what's going on. Reality on like a grander scale, of course, not just our 3D, like touchable reality.
Don't get me started on that one.
I mean, yeah, the reality we can poke is not necessarily all the reality I'm talking about. But yeah, absolutely. And it's so many things as adults become so drastically overcomplicated. And two things that I think we need to claim our power back in that space from are creativity, because that doesn't need to be a complicated thing. And any aspect of spirituality, energy work, healing, all of those sorts of things also doesn't need to be a complicated thing. Like those things, this oftentimes, in my opinion, the simpler they are, the more effective they can be for you. It's just a matter of like getting over your own human brain to get to that space. And so that's the other part of like the creative process. It's like, if let's just make it as simple as we can so that you're focused on the energy and you can feel activated and it's fun, because that's the big thing that we've lost as adults and a lot of times.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Yeah. I mean, books are so. I mean, I'm actually dyslexic, and so books for me, it's a bit like being drunk. The words sort of shift and move, but you still, you know, like with audios and whatnot, there's still so much magic in there, and there's so much power in those books. And I mean, like you sort of. So if I may, you know, sort of, you mentioned the spirituality side. You know, I mean, where have you gone on that side? So obviously, the book writing is a big thing, but is there any, you know, is there other parts that sort of blend with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, on top of doing all this book stuff and this writing stuff, I am a professional psychic. I do readings for people. Psychic is a very not large enough word to describe what I do, but there's also not one big enough, I think. So I always have just gone with that one and let everyone figure it out once they get into the reading space. Basically, I have from the time I was itty bitty, I knew about all different abilities, could see different beings in my room and communicate with guides and feel everybody else's feelings and understand, you know, all sorts of different stuff. And then I shut it down out of fear, as we're wont to do. If it's not super fostered, then it gets shut down, and then it becomes a source of, you know, fear in general itself. And then it blocks off your own intuition, period. And so then you make really bad choices, which is basically what I did. And then once I kind of was over those bad choices, once I left the abusive marriage that I was in, kind of reclaimed all of that, and reopened it up and that sort of thing. So now I really specialize in activating people's abilities for them. So clearing out the gunk that's blocking their own intuitive rivers, as I like to call it. Basically, the way I describe it is we all have a magical river inside of us, and then we spend our entire life throwing garbage into it to try to dam it up. So I help people remove said garbage energetically so that their river can start flowing again. I work a lot with extra dimensional beings, deities, spirit guides, that sort of channeling aspects, and then just energy fields, energy healing, those sorts of things, to really help benefit people. So that is the other kind of side of it that I do personally. I've been trained in Reiki and theta healing and a bunch of different modalities, astral projection, like all these different things. My biggest thing with it though is, and I've kind of alluded to this already, is when I was going through my spiritual reawakening, I was so frustrated because everything was so effing complicated. It was so confusing. There was so many different aspects to everything. It was so hard to learn everything at once. One concept you could study for 3 months and not even fully grasp or understand at the core of it. And so what I have personally tried to do with all of my businesses and practices and everything that I can do is make things as simple and as effective as possible for people to both grasp and to utilize in a way that doesn't feel like they have to, you know, conjure spirits in order to be able to just heal this one limiting belief, right? Like, so that's where I've gone with all of that.
Cool. Have you ever done, or have you ever considered doing a book on? Well, obviously, a book on the psychic side, the spiritual side. But have you ever channeled a book? I know we said about channeling books that way, but have you ever had like a guide or somebody actually channel their information that way?
Yes, I have. I'm currently writing 3 different books. Let's start there. So in the 3 different books that I'm currently writing, one, she's not necessarily a guide, but one of her guides is one of my guides, if that makes sense. So, and it's a historical fantasy about a woman who did actually live. I've talked to her channeling in ancient Rome, and she was actually a poisoner. She poisoned multiple emperors, but she was from Gaul, so wasn't even from Rome, even though she had that really high status. And that, like, she's a throwaway line in like 3 different ancient texts, and that's it. And I was like, there's something else there. So that whole story channeled through me basically from my guide that is also her guide, or was also her guide in that lifetime. So that's one of the stories that I am writing, is to get all of that kind of wisdom in her story out, which I'm not usually a historical writing person because there's so many dates and details that I'm like, whoa, it gets overwhelming. But that's one of them that it's like, nope, you got to write this. This needs to be in the world. And I'm like, okay, here you go. You can have it then. I'll make it be a thing. But yeah, and so that's a big one. As far as like a nonfiction channeling from my guide, that sort of thing, I have thought about doing that with a couple of my different guides, or even doing like kind of a compilation or anthology of different channelings and messages. It will, I'm sure, eventually come and be a thing in reality. But yeah, so that's the big one as far as like channeled directly from like a guide of like, you need to tell this story, even though it's totally not my typical story.
And that's very, I love that. It's really interesting because there's one thing. My uncle actually was the first to say it when I was a kid. He said you must always remember that history is written by the victors. That the victors write history. And so like whoever won, they will always portray the history in a certain way. But also, and I mean, I am a man, but also history tends to be written by men, and so there's a lot of information that sort of slips by or misled. Me loving the East and stuff. Moonland, the story of Moonland, they sort of portrayed the original Disney, both of them, and they sort of portrayed it as, oh, she was in trouble with her father, because, she went off to war. Her father, in the Eastern stories, her father was very grateful because he was a frail man, and the emperor says somebody, from every family, a male has to go to war. And so to honor her family, she went, and they actually don't tell that she actually was a bit of a badass female who then created a whole troop of almost like for those who remember the A-Team, a female bunch of the A-Team. She she was part of, and so there's a lot of information that has slipped by and dropped by, and it's interesting how now now it's very much about setting things straight, setting the record straight. There's definitely things happening and will be happening over the next 10 years that people going, what? No, I didn't know that. What? Well, of course you didn't know that, because nobody would, no one's willing to tell you that. But anyway, but so I love that idea, and the whole point of the guy, people, that information is channeled, but and that's the whole point. You see this information, and these stories can come from other places and other realms, which is very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is so fun to kind of heal our history through stories, which I think is just a really neat energy. So like even calling that out about like Mulan, and like there's so many people who are doing things kind of like myth retellings too, right? Like that's a big kind of hot thing in the publishing industry right now, is myth retellings. And a lot of people are like, oh, it's just because, that's great story material that you can kind of mine from. And I'm like, I actually feel like it's us kind of reconciling with our history a little bit on an energetic level of like, let's retell it like this, where the woman is empowered and not just strapped to a rock to be eaten by a bird. Like, maybe we can fix that. Like, maybe we can make that a better thing. And that's a really neat way of like kind of connecting with people that came before us and channeling their energies, not just the people in the story, but like the people that were around in that time period, the first people to hear the story told. And, you know, you're channeling all of that energy into this space to do a retelling of whatever it is. Or, you know, you're someone like me who has been yelled at by a historical figure that has decided I need to write their book. That's also a thing that's coming up, right? A reconciling of that piece too. And in a lot of ways, we have to kind of, in order to reconcile that, it is really necessary to channel, because there isn't written sources in so many ways. Like I said, she's a throwaway line in Tacitus, and like he was a misogynistic prick anyway. So like there's not anything else there. So that's all you can do is kind of channel and hope that you're connecting with her deep enough to get the story out correctly. And it's such a cool thing to be in this time of human history where we not only can connect with everybody in the world right now if we want to, but also we can like connect with our ancestors and have the space and comfort to do that, which is just really powerful.
Well, yeah, and there's this interesting thing. I'll tiptoe over this a little bit. Is that friends, well, people I used to work with decades ago, which are part of the alphabet agencies that your wonderful, a few that were mine, but in your wonderful country, there was very interesting things they would always say. And there was one guy in particular. I've actually said this quite a few times on this show. There was one guy in particular who's never joked, very serious, very straight, and there was a couple of things that I'll say not quite related to this, but I'll say it anyway, but in a minute. But one of the things I said, I love the stories of, like, Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, and he would say they're not stories, they're soft disclosure. What? Pardon? What was? But Lord of the Rings. This is, well, where and the Witch and the Wardrobe. This is, well, where do you think the idea came? It wasn't a wardrobe they came through, but it was a entrance, a doorway, a gateway. And there was these little hints, and it's like, so, like, this whole idea of you coming up with a story. Even there's this interesting thing within the ancients. They would tell stories about themselves, or there's nothing, because there's this whole idea, this whole concept that past, present, and future is still happening all at the same time. So when we've sort of been told, you shouldn't rethink, or you're imagining, your past, you're changing your past. But if you're changing your past, heals your future or heals your present. So, if something happens in your past and you can rewrite it in some way, that is a very powerful thing. I mean, there was a technique that I learned in Taoist called the Dragon Dog Shaman, and they talk about they talk about being that within Dragon Dog Shaman you can go past, present, or future, and you can go back to the past. And you can be there for yourself, or you can be there for people in an energetic form, but you can be there just to say, you're going to make it. I know you in the future. You're going to make it. You're going to be fine. And the weird thing on that is that I started learning that when I was about 16, 17. But from about 10 onwards, I sort of got very depressed as a kid and almost tried to commit suicide a couple of times. And there was always something there. There was just something like a presence, an energy which felt weirdly familiar, that was just sort of like there to comfort me. And when I was bullied or when I was alone, it was always there. And then around about 17, 18, I started learning this technique, and I suddenly realized that the thing that I felt was me going back to the past and then actually, being there for myself in a weird way. And ever since then, I've sent it to the future, and I've done past events as well. But there's this idea of that the past, present, and future is happening. So, it's like it. Whether somebody says, "Oh, you're making that story up," or whether it's totally spot on, it doesn't matter, because that expressing that out, that energy out, is actually getting the people, well, what if it's true? What if that is, that the case? And you're allowing us to sort of change the past in a way, or see it in a different way, in a different light, because everything's always you only get one viewpoint. In the things that are written down from the past were only written in one viewpoint, the victor. But what about the other side? What about the other people? And it's a great way if you're channeling that energy. If it's coming through, everything exists, is meant to exist. So therefore, that version of what you're feeling comes through, and it changes things. Why is that not a bad thing? Why is that good? Why is that not a good thing? Anyway, what do I know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you can change anyone's reality forever just with a conversation or with a story or with anything like that. So channeling in whatever it is that's coming through for you, if you're like, this needs to be a story that's told, yes, it does. Yes, it does. And I love that the concept, it's so hard for people to grasp a lot of times that all of time is happening basically simultaneously. But that is a really cool way of thinking about it, is that experience that you had of you going back and actually comforting yourself, because that is a thing that's possible very, very easily.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I wouldn't say, obviously we have many, everybody's got guides. They may not. I love that whole idea of because when we're kids, we naturally talk to imaginary friends. Why, we say kids have imaginary friends, but we go to a psychic that talks to guides, or talks to, or you want you want a psychic or medium to talk to, your loved ones in the past. But children are talking to imaginary friends. Why are they talking? Why isn't it not guides? Why isn't it already that they're already talking to the guides? They're already talking to.
It's so disempowering. It's literally a way of like taking away your children's power to believe in what they're actually tuning into and channeling. I try so hard. I have 3 kids myself, and I try to enforce that all the time of like, oh, who are you talking to? Is it a guide? What are they saying? Is it, what's going on? Are you playing a game? Like, what's happening with, like, to like talk to them further about it, to like hopefully validate the experience they're having as something that is real, as opposed to just being like, oh, how cute you are making it up. Like, that's not fair. And also on the core of that, everybody has these abilities. Like, everybody has psychic abilities. Everyone has intuitive abilities. There is no one on this planet that is like, no, you weren't blessed with the psychic gene. Like, that's not how it works. It's not how it works. Everyone can do this, which is also a big emphasis in my work of like, there is no reason why you can't, other than yourself and healing and doing these things. You have just as expansive abilities as everyone else does. So everyone can do it. And that's mostly, we've just been so disempowered to believe that we're powerless little things, which we're not.
Yeah, 100%, and that, and you listen, or certain movies haven't done that, like the X-Men, or you've got superpowers. Everybody's got superpowers. Everybody's got the ability to harness the superpowers, and I know that not as a whim. I know that's a fact. Going back to my alphabet agencies, there's a thing called remote viewing, and remote viewing. They have taught military people, people that everything is black and white. If I can't see it, it doesn't exist. And they taught these guys to remote view, and one of the agencies that I won't mention has actually released a report 10 years ago, 15 years ago, about a remote view report of them going to Mars and seeing the ancient civilization that exists on Mars. So this ability to remote view is like, from where you are, you actually experience the outside world inside you, because there's actually no difference between the outside and the inside. Or a lot of people who, a lot of people nowadays who get overwhelmed by when there's too many people around. They're empaths. They're feeling the emotional energy of other people, which that doesn't exist. All of these abilities exist. The FT 100 and 500 index, or Fortune 500 and 100 index businesses have been using psychics and mediums. One of my friends, Anne Jersh, that I brought on, who's she started progression, looking into the future, and from regression, she's going into progression, and she's a future life analyst. She's done a lot of that for index businesses. She's done a lot of that for military. All these, the military, the private industries and the big industries, they know all about these abilities, but they keep it to themselves, because that way it's a resource that's just for them and they can use.
Yeah.
And society poo-poos it all, but actually there's so much proof there, and just looking at the physics, there's so much proof there.
Yeah, there's so much proof there. And I mean, same goes for things like astrology. Like all the Fortune 500 companies use astrologers like to plan out certain like days that are advantageous, and like all of the stuff that grand society is like, oh, that's fake. It's like, yes, you've been tricked. It's not fake. It's all very, very real. If anything, it's opening up more now than it has in thousands of years for a lot. I mean, our vibration is finally kind of on the upswing again. So more people are coming in more awake, more people are coming in more open, more people are coming in to shake things up and make sure that as people grow and evolve, they can open these abilities up more. And that's like something that is like a very personal goal of mine. I think at the core of it, like if I could make psychic abilities like dinner table conversation for people's households like on a more regular basis, I would be so happy. Like if I am the source of some people's dinner table conversations in a way that's comfortable and everyone can just talk about these abilities in households maybe they weren't talked about before, I've lived.
I tell you what, I'm especially because of Alex, I'm looking at coming to America at some point. I'm actually an ex-chef and baker. I'll do the dinner party. I'll create the food, and we'll do psychic chats, and also I'll throw in some qigong in there as well. And actually, I'm a trained masseuse, and so I can even do, as a dessert, I can do massage for everybody. So there's a business right there for me. There we go.
Yeah.
I love that idea. Psychic dinner, psychic conversations.
Yeah, just to facilitate, like not even if we had to facilitate. First of all, love the idea. Let's totally do it. Second of all, but like if someone could go, it could be to the level of people who are like, go and sit down with their parents for dinner or whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, I felt these energies today, or I got this message. And the parents were like, oh, that's amazing. Like how did that come through? And it could be like that level of comfort, the same way you would talk about like a friend you ran into at the store. Like that would be so healing for our world, just to like have this deep acknowledgement that there is more stuff than we can, touch and see and feel. Like amazing.
I definitely think it's coming. I definitely think, because I look back to just the last 3 generations, and I know far more people that are talking about. I mean, obviously, like attracts like, and so I see, a lot more people anyway, but I think it is opening up more. And I think,
yeah,
I think I would like you, I would like it to happen tomorrow, but I definitely feel within 3 more generations, it will definitely be far more common. But the idea of making it now, the idea of, if we could do, the sooner we could do that, the better, because the whole point is, if you go back to being that childlike energy, and like accepting those, seeing those things, accepting. I mean, if you need evidence, I can point you into several quantum physics experiments that have certain proof on entities. We already know, when the scientists, if you ever hear them say that we only visibly see 0.1% or 0.5%, depending who you talk to, of visible stuff. And you think, oh yeah, they mean the universe. They mean right in your living room. Mm-hmm. That what actually is floating around, what's actually happening. And I've just had, funny, I literally just did a show where we talked about this, where the eye, they know, because I studied medical side as well, and they know from that our eyes are actually can actually see infrared light and ultraviolet light, but for some reason that information is not actually going into, it's going into the visual cortex, but it doesn't go any further. And they've done scans and used the older MRI scans, and they've actually seen this, that they've flashed infrared and ultraviolet light. And the eyes are picking it up, and it's going to the brain, but the person's not actually seeing it. And I think it's this whole subconscious of, oh, we're not allowed, oh, that doesn't exist, we can't see it. We've shut that off and shut that down. But they know that in ultraviolet cameras and infrared cameras, that when you put that just in the sky, you point this awesome camera you can get, infrared camera, and you point it at the sky, and like in the daytime, nighttime, and let it record for a couple of hours, then go back and play it, you'll see weird things moving about that you can't visibly see, but something's there, something's floating about. And I'm not saying, whatever, it could be UFO, ghost, other dimension, banana, it could be anything. But it's something floating about, and there's things that are around in our atmosphere, and there's things around dimensionally. The whole point they now say this, NASA says there's 14 dimensions with living, that dimensions with life in them, is because they started picking up within, like walking around us, other stuff, something that is just out of our plane of existence. It's almost like a radio signal. It's slightly just tuned the other way, and it's there, but we can't see it. And the Dragon Dogs used to say this all the time. And as often I've seen something walking past me or going past in my mind's eye and going, I've just seen a freaking dinosaur. But not here, but it's there, but it's there and not at the same time. But there's far more.
I describe it as radio stations because people are like, dimensions, how can they exist together? I'm like, well, just because you're listening to the country station, it doesn't mean the rock and roll station is gone, right? Like they're all still there. So right now we're on this radio station, but the dinosaurs are on the next one over. And then we have, a higher dimensional beings on the next one after that. And then the fairies are over here. And like, it's just different radio stations, but they're all existing simultaneously.
Well, you just reminded me, that guy, that CII, I said it now, I didn't mean to say it, but the guy, the Alphabet Agency guy that was always very serious, I once joked with him because we'd come back from we'd seen something, or come back from a certain place and seen something. I joked and said, so when are you guys going to admit that the fairies, Bigfoot, the fairies, Bigfoot and unicorns exist? I didn't mention UFOs. The fairies, Bigfoot and unicorns exist. And he said, we are fully aware that there are other dimensions where these beings exist, and that there are certain points of the earth where the veil thins and they appear and disappear. And he's deadly serious, and that's the whole point, is that these stories, where do these stories come from? The unicorns, the fairies. In China, unicorns are called Quillin. They're I think it's Quillin. And they were more, and it was sort of like it looked a little bit dragony as well, but it's got this big horn at its head. So unicorns existed in many different places. They seem giants in many different places.
The dragons.
Dragons, yeah. Well, the dragons in China don't have wings because they are said to fly through the air. They can they swim through qi. The qi is the air and everything. They swim through qi. Mm-hmm. And also the interesting, I've mentioned this before, the interesting with dragons in China, originally the Eastern stories of dragons, they didn't have scales, they had fur. And there's a movie that's just come out with about dragons, and the dragon is furry. And it's like, well, that in the Eastern stories, dragons had fur; they didn't have scales.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway,
really interesting how there's so many different mythologies. I recently talked to, on my podcast, I talked to Freddie Silva, who has studied like ancient mythology. We're talking about people who existed at the same time as Atlantis, but he went around and talked to all these different indigenous cultures from around the world to get their myths and then overlap them, and was like, hey, look at all of these really similar myths about what came before us, and like let's analyze them together. And it's really just fascinating. But like, it's to that level of like even myths that from cultures that are completely disconnected and never had contact in that period of time, air quotes, not physical contact, probably mental contact or whatever, have very similar stories to each other, or have very similar, beings in the stories, or have similar ideology around what happened with this sort of situation, and that is, again, part of our reclaiming stories as people. At the core of it is like, hey, this is something that spans all people. and connects us all.
And that's the whole, that's the whole point. But one of the things I always sort of in for me again, I always come back to Taoism sooner or later. But the whole point is that don't get lost in the outer stuff, because everything that exists on the outside is actually a reflection of what's inside. Yeah. And your inner worlds, and again, your inner worlds are actually reflections of the outer world. And again, that's why stories are so powerful, because you can, there are definitely stories that I've known that have healed me in some ways. But I know people that have read certain stories that changed their lives and changed their. And we talk about not factual books, but fictional books, but both. But the whole idea of a story has existed since the dawn of time. That stories contain so much magic, but they also contain a lot of metaphor, and they can help you learn and help you understand. And because it comes from that place of play, it comes from that place of imagination. It goes beyond the science side of you, or the masculine side of you, the feminine side of you, and the child side of you. It blends all of them together, and stories can be so so powerful. And like you see grown adults come out of a a Star Wars movie saying, "Where's my lightsaber? I want a lightsaber." I've actually got 2 lightsabers in the corner, but it's the whole idea of playing. It's the whole idea of stories are very powerful and are very magical, and that's because and that energy, the psychic abilities that is there. We're meant to be part of that magic. The fact in adulthood we've literally killed that off, or we've burnt that side, and then a lot of people get into alcohol or drugs or into extreme sports or sex, because they've got that emptiness, and that emptiness, part of that emptiness is that child, that inner child that you shut down, you cut off, that play that leads to these magical realities and to psychic abilities and everything else, and it's that reconnection that's so important.
Yeah, people don't think about it as trauma to have your imagination taken from you, and you have to grow up and be serious. That is a traumatic thing. Like, it's a genuinely traumatic thing. Even if you had the best childhood ever in the history of time, you still had that enforced in you in some way of, you can't have this play anymore, you're an adult, kids don't do that, like even from your peers, right? So that's a traumatic thing, to lose that part of yourself. So reconnecting with it is healing in so many ways, and just even overcoming that trauma. And I love that you brought up fiction books. Personally, I feel like those are far more healing in a lot of ways than the nonfiction stuff. I appreciate nonfiction for what it is. I've written it too. But that being said, when you learn through a story and you don't really know that you're learning, and you're getting activated and you're healing these different parts of yourself without even realizing that you are, it creates such a different magical experience in your energy field that truly changes your outlook so often. Like, I mean, the best example of this is people who've read The Alchemist. I mean, everyone who's ever read The Alchemist is always like, this is the most profound book, but it's a fiction story. I personally love Narnia. I have a tattoo of it on my arm, and like that was the first book when I was a kid where I was like, no, I think this this other dimensional thing is like a reality. I feel like I've tuned into it personally, and this is a validating thing, which takes us even deeper. And I love that this is coming so much more into the conversation. It makes me so happy. That is why representation in fiction is so, so important. That is like of different people, different cultures, different ways of life, like all these things. That is why representation, no matter if it's a fantasy book or a historical book or modern day, contemporary, it doesn't really matter, as long as there's some level of representation of different spaces and different people, not only to validate the people who can totally relate to that, but people who can't relate to that get awoken by those experiences, by reading about these characters that don't necessarily exist in a culture they're familiar with. And that is how we expand more of our consciousness around different types of people and accepting others on the planet, which is really powerful too.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the fact that, and I say this obviously with music as well, but if a story makes you cry, like we're reading, obviously we're a movie, but even especially in the book, reading the book, and it can make you cry or it can make you laugh, or you lift your heart, or you can release something. That is a teacher, that is a teacher, that is a healer right there, and that is a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing to receive as a reader, and it's a powerful thing to create as a writer. We all have that power. I mean, I will probably, I know, I spoke to Alice, and eventually, once she's written her 127 books, then she's gonna, I will get her to dictate a couple of mine for me, because I'm more of a verbal person, and I can write about 3 words a year, but I can talk, I can talk the hind legs off a donkey and persuade it to go for a walk afterwards. So I'll get somebody to I'll audio my book, or maybe just make it an audio. Maybe that might be easier.
I mean, that's a really powerful thing that we have the ability to do now, where we can audio our book to people. You can talk about it and have someone write it down across the world, and that's good. Like that, you can do that. It's really amazing.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure that's the same, but I think everybody's got one good book in them. I remember hearing that from somewhere, that everybody's got one story to tell, or one novel to tell, or and each story is a note to that tune, that melody of the world, and I think so. So I think like writing, even if it's just in your diary, but to allow yourself that opportunity to express something in a book, it on paper, is a very powerful, magical thing.
It's profoundly healing. Like, talk about reconnecting with your inner child to tell the story. And I always want to like caveat with this, like, it doesn't have to be your life story to be your story. Because oftentimes people discredit fiction sometimes because they're like, oh, I just want to tell my story of like the things that happened in my life. And that's fine and beautiful if that's what you want to tell. But there's ways to tell that where it's healing for you, as opposed to just, let's put this on paper because this really happened to me. And it can still be your story. It can be reflective of different parts of you. That's a big thing we do in the Forgotten Storytellers, is we look at your astrology chart. My business partner is like a world-renowned astrologer and astrological mage. And so she looks at your astrology chart and is like, okay, well, this is where your North Node is, and this is where your South Node is, and this is where your Chiron is. Like, this is all the places that you're healing. And so obviously your main character in this book, because you're in this time of your life, is going to be overcoming those things too, because you're aligned with them right now. And it's really powerful to see the different, like, fractalization of concepts into different ways of existing and communicating.
Indeed. Now, believe it or not, we've actually gone for an hour. We've done an hour already, so I'm going to wrap it up. I will start to wrap it up, but I mean, before we go, is there anything you like, any last piece of wisdom or anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Well, mostly that if you have an idea for a story, you were meant to tell that story, and that everyone is an author if they want to be. And everyone has these abilities, these psychic and magical abilities, and you have the power to wake those up. We are right now actually currently accepting pitches for our next cohort of Forgotten Storytellers. So if anyone is interested in that, you can check out any of my social media, and there's the link to submit your pitch. My handle is @likerofwords. I know, it's a shock. It's such a big shock. But @likerofwords is my handle on pretty much everything. You can look there and just send us your story idea, and we would love to help you to put it on paper. Get your first draft solidly done, create an aligned publishing plan for you, and do it all in alignment with your spirit guides and astrological divine timing. That's how we're ushering in this next level of evolution for people, is through our stories. And I can't wait to read everyone else's.
Wow, that's cool. So I've actually already, so on Instagram, we're both on Instagram. I've actually shared it as a story, funny enough, with the link to this already, and I will send you shortly the link. So for everybody else out there, you can find this, or if I'm saying this, you've already listened, but all the stories, all the podcasts I do are, you can find me on The Way of Conscious Mindfulness on Facebook, or The Way of Seafood Boggy, also on Facebook, the two pages I have there. You can also find seafood.boggy on Instagram, and Seafood Boggy on YouTube, where all of these shows are, as well as the other stuff I do, which is Qigong, Tai Chi, and Zendong, Reiki, and all that sort of stuff. But also you can find me on Bring Me to Life Network, and my audio's there, and it's also therefore on Spotify, when you can look me up either as Seafood Boggy or The Way of Conscious Mindfulness. Both of those you will find there. Well, thank you so much. I have enjoyed this immensely, Emily. I actually would love, I think we've got more to talk about, if I'm honest. I do think we could definitely squeeze another one in, or go from another angle at some point. So
absolutely,
you are more than happy to come on anytime you want, again, because I have had great fun, I must admit. So you don't go anywhere just yet, but everybody else, I hope you've enjoyed today's show. And until next time, remember, open your mind to the way, the conscious way, the way